Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries channel. Today we're talking about Fulham, the first team promoted into the Premier League last season. We're going to be looking forward to their season ahead, and we're talking to the brilliant Sonia Twigg. So, Sonia, do you want to just tell everybody about how you work with the club? I mean, you're one of the most connected people in there, and you can give fascinating insights.
Yeah, so I covered Fulham the entire sort of season in lockdown, really. I think it was the year fans were only allowed in twice, and did all the press conferences and all the home matches as well as some away. I kept in contact with the club during the championship season, went to quite a few press conferences and a few matches as well, while also following them on TV because my main job sort of is Premier League focused rather than Championship.
And I guess, you know, your relationship there with Fulham started in difficult circumstances. Was that like a tough first season to cover?
It was really tough because normally a lot of your time covering a club, you go to the training ground and is speaking to people. And sort of all of that time, you know, getting there an hour before, chatting to the media staff, chatting to whoever else is around, and suddenly all of that has just been condensed to this very formalised half an hour Zoom. And you can't go watch the under-23s or the under-18s and really get to know people. So it was quite difficult, especially in only my second ever season in sports as a sports reporter. So that added an extra dimension to the challenge, but it was good. I think you're a lot closer to it in a way because you were one of the only people actually watching the club. So a lot of the time, if you watch it on TV, there are so many things that you don't see. And I was talking to some Fulham fans about it and going, well, actually, it's sort of more like this, but I know that you won't see that because you're not there, even though obviously previously they would all have been there.
And emotively as well, are you excited to see them back in the Premier League? I mean, is this incarnation of Fulham maybe one of the most exciting?
I think it's definitely one of the most exciting in recent years. And I think one thing about Fulham that's quite positive is they do learn from their mistakes. You know, that famous season where they came up, spent 100 million on God knows who and went straight back down again. They do seem to have really learned from that and are approaching the transfer market much more sensibly and sort of getting in specific players to fill gaps rather than just being like, oh, he might be good, he's expensive, but it doesn't matter. Let's sort of throw money at it and hope it sticks.
Let's move then on to the team. You know, last season they had record-breaking season. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of the data and the underlying kind of facts there. But for somebody that maybe hasn't seen Fulham play, what are the tactics? Because they're quite an exciting team to watch, aren't they?
They definitely are. I think it's a big move from the style they played under Scott Parker to the much more open, free-flowing and attacking football that we've seen under Marco Silva. They have conceded a bit, which potentially will concern teams. You know, there's lots of sort of high-scoring games. But I think it's very exciting to watch. They exploit the wings, and sort of once Mitrovic gets the ball in the box, it was almost a foregone conclusion last year.
And I think as well, going deeper into it, they're really possession-based, aren't they? The data shows second in the Championship for average time on the ball per game, second most passes within every sequence. Is it akin to maybe Pep Guardiola, or is that a bit too much to kind of describe it as Pep light?
I think it's more like the football you see in sort of Portugal and Spain, where teams do have the ball a lot more and the build-up is a lot slower. I don't think it's the same way as Manchester City, who will just not let the ball go and then win it back almost immediately. I think it's more a slow, measured build-up than it is sort of passing completely through and around teams.
And the formation of the team is quite clearly set as well. It's usually the 4-2-3-1 used in 43 out of 46 Championship matches. There's no reason really for Silva to change that in the Premier League, is there?
No, I think if that's what the players are used to and they are keeping quite a large chunk of their squad, then I don't think it makes sense to change the formation. I think they might see a difference in roles, especially dealing with some of the bigger Premier League clubs, but I don't think they would set up fundamentally differently unless it was to counter a specific problem. But I think it's worked quite well, and lots of teams play with 4-2-3-1 in the Premier League. It's not so out there that it almost demands a change.
And I guess as well, looking again at the data of the average positions of players, when the team are in attack, this is what really kind of attracted me to the team as well. They look more like a 2-4-4, which is really outrageous. Do you think that they will kind of keep to that incredible attacking intent in the Championship? And do you think as well, we'll get on to him a little bit more, again, his data, but does the signing of Palhinha kind of allow that to continue because he gives such defensive solidity?
I think they will attack with less players in the Premier League. I think they will be much more worried about being caught on the counter. Their first game is Liverpool. I don't see them committing anywhere near like that in attack, given Liverpool's, attacking threat. I think Palhinha does offer some cover to the defence, but I do think the centre of defence is not as strong as it was last time they were in the Premier League.
So let's look at the data then. And as you said, the team was good in defence, but they weren't absolutely brilliant. But there's also the fact of the matter that the team actually underperformed on their XG conceded. Do you believe that this will be exacerbated a bit further, seeing that the Premier League has higher shot quality and better finishing? Is there going to be many clean sheets for the team this time around?
It's always difficult to say, but at the start of the last time they're in the Premier League, they conceded 10 goals in their opening 3 games in September before signing 6 defenders. So while I don't think it might be quite that stark, I think it's definitely going to be a much more difficult challenge to try and keep the higher attacking threat. And also because they haven't made a signing at centre-back, and that is quite obvious when you look at the Fulham team. Tim Ream historically has not started in Premier League defence. Well, he did during 2 of those 3 games at the start of the last season before Adebayo and Anderson came in, and they were much more solid and much more suited to the Premier League. So I do think there is a bit of a gap there, even though I think Palhinha will sort of help. He isn't a centre-back, and I think that's what they really need.
But Tim Ream was... Am I correct in saying he was the only player that played in every game in the Championship last season? So do you see him being rested or not played as much, especially if a new centre-back comes in?
I think historically that's what Fulham have done. He's been there since 2015, and each Premier League season he's sort of been sidelined a little bit. He's a good option off the bench, but he's not especially tall. He's not a bad player. He's a fantastic Championship defender. I just haven't been convinced by him making that step up to the Premier League.
So what would you say is the biggest problem at the back then? Is it personnel related? Is it only going to be improved by signings?
Well, they're signing, it looks like they're close to signing Kevin and Babu at right back, which I think will offer some competition. There's a lack of, obviously last time in the Premier League, they had Anderson, who was such a natural leader, and Areola behind him. And I know they're looking at a new goalkeeper, but there's nothing sort of seems that close to getting over the line yet. So I think if they don't get new personnel, they do need someone to really take charge of that back line, establish themselves as a leader and keep it, very organised, as you have to be against some of the attacks in the Premier League.
And do you think as well that they're going to keep to their high press? They had a 11.5 PPDA in the Championship last season, which was the second highest pressing data. Or is that again something that will probably be tweaked, even though it was effective with 9 goals coming from, winning the ball on a high turnover?
I think it will very much depend on the opposition. I think that's sort of what Marco Silva was suggesting in his press conferences towards the end of last year, once they'd secured promotion, that they won't compromise on, they're not going to fundamentally change the way that they're going to play in the Premier League. But obviously you can't play the same against Liverpool and Man City as you can against sort of the teams like Bournemouth and Forest, who they played last year. So I think those are the games we might see the high press and really going for it. Whereas I think against the bigger clubs, it might be a sort of more contained style.
Let's move to the fun of the attack then. And I think that's where, I mean, you've got a wry smile on your face. You've probably got memories of how good they were last season. They had a record-breaking season. So again, kind of exploring the tactics, how do they create such a high volume of chances? Because not only are they creating high volume, but they're creating high quality as well. I think their XG per shot was one of the best in the championship. And obviously Mitrovic was the big beneficiary of that.
I mean, he just basically didn't make a mistake when he was going for goal. You know, every time he got the ball, you almost assumed it was going in the back of the net, and when it wasn't, you were surprised. I know people going on, you know, Fulham has scored 2 and Mitrovic hasn't scored. That can't be right. So I think he thrives when he's being delivered good service, and I think that's what he got last year, and that's what he struggled with before. You know, Harry Wilson and him just linked up so well together, and Carvalho as well, just completely slotted into that dynamic attacking threat. So I think that's sort of what they're going to be looking to do this time. And Mitrovic isn't the quickest, but he is very physical and will hold up the ball and allow other people to, you know, run off him. And I think that's much more where he's suited. Last time the formation was sort of to come down the wings and cross the ball into him. And he was the only one often in the box when he did play in the Premier League. And I think that's just so easy for Premier League defences to defend against. Whereas if you've got people sort of running in and around, it sort of pulls the defence in much more different directions.
This is something that I wanted to explore a bit further, because as you said there, he's not alone in the box. He's not alone in the creativity or the attack at all, because the fullbacks get involved, so they offer that width, they offer crossing, but then you've also kind of got the inside forwards and that floating 10 that goes to either side of the pitch and creates overloads. Is this something that Premier League teams defending them are going to have to watch out for? Because there's so many different ways that they can attack. It doesn't have to just be through the centre, through the wingers, or with crossing. It's a combination of all of them.
I think definitely. I think it's something that a lot of Premier League defences, particularly those in the lower half of the table, might struggle with, because a lot of the time the team have quite set ways in which they attack. And if you can always do something unexpected, I always feel like you're more likely to score, especially, you know, other than like Liverpool and City, where they've just got outstanding players who can produce something incredible on the day. You do need like options up front. It's something that some of the clubs last year struggled with quite a lot, where it became quite one-dimensional, which for defences, you know, if you know what the opposition is going to do, you can set up a plan. Whereas if it's unpredictable, you've got to adapt, and that can lead to more individual mistakes.
Talking to Ted Knutson from StatsBomb, he explained that teams can expect a third drop-off in data outputs at least. It depends on the quality of the players. But do you believe that the quality within the Fulham squad will kind of see that drop-off minimised? Do you think that they have enough to actually really bother Premier League defences?
I don't think... I mean, it would be sort of fantasy to think they can trouble the likes of, you know, Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, but I do think they have enough to trouble the teams that they're going to be really competing against. In, you know, you talk often about those mini leagues. I think the ones in and around the bottom six, I think if Fulham can get everything working right, it doesn't have to work exactly as it did in the Championship, but sort of similarly, I think they do have enough to trouble the teams that, you know, they will be competing against, to try and stay in the top flight.
And I guess, can you answer the question for a lot of people? In the FPL community, Mitrovic has become almost like a little bit of a meme, that once he comes into the Premier League, he seems to lose his shooting boots. I don't know what happens. Does he forget to play football? I don't know. But is this finally the time for Mitrovic to shine in the Premier League?
Personally, I would be waiting a few games to put him in my fantasy team.
I guess that's good advice. I mean, the other player from the attack is Harry Wilson. I think maybe he might offer, and you might agree, you might disagree, a better way into that attack if you want to go into Fulham assets. But with Wilson, what I like is he's on set pieces, which doesn't get too affected by what league you're in. I mean, does he have a realistic threat that you'd be more interested in, and people need to keep an eye on him?
Oh, definitely. I think if you're going to go for a Fulham player, I think going for any sort of defensive or defender would be a little bit risky, given previous season's history. But I think if you're going to put in a Fulham player, Harry Wilson would definitely be my top pick, because, as you said, he is on those set pieces, and he finished with a few goals and I think you may correct me if I'm wrong, but the highest number of assists in the Championship last season as well.
Yeah, and some of the best creative data as well, XA per 90 or all that kind of fantastic stuff that you look for. I want to bring it on to the transfers so far. Let's focus first of all on the losses of the team. Who is the bigger loss, though, Carvalho or Jean-Michel Seri?
I think Carvalho. I think it's one thing that Fulham managers have spoken about in the last years. I mean, they've lost two of their most creative, exciting talents to Liverpool and one to Spurs. And I think Carvalho, if he stayed another year, it would have been really exciting. Fulham wouldn't really have had to change that sort of how they attacked. No one would have had to fit in. They could have really built their team around him and Wilson. Neither of them are particularly old. They could have really formed something together. And I think losing him, especially to a club like Liverpool, who also took Harvey Elliott, I think is quite a big blow to Fulham. I mean, it's good, for their academy that they are nurturing these players, but you really want them to stay for sort of 2 or 3 years and give you that first team boost rather than making their breakthrough season and leaving immediately.
Looking at the data, Carvalho, it's exceptional kind of stuff that he achieved last year in that number 10 role. He wasn't especially creative. It was more in the fact of the way that he got involved with goal scoring. 1.62 chances created per 90, 0.18 XA per 90, which was impressive. 7th most creative player in the Championship last season, but that wasn't what he was in there for. 2.5 shots per 90, 0.27 XG and 0.32 goals per 90, which shows his finishing ability to kind of exceed that XG. I mean, who can replicate that for Fulham, or is there going to be a tactical tweak and not have that kind of free roll 10?
I mean, I don't think there are that many quality, especially 19-year-old number 10s around at the moment. I think Fulham would love to have someone who they can sort of pick up and slot in to do that role, but there aren't that many of them around. Liverpool seems to have most of them as well.
I guess though, what difference will there be in the team then? Because Silva does like that type of 10. He does like the kind of goal-scoring 10 rather than a creative midfielder. Is that going to see maybe, I don't know, two 8s in the midfield and a single pivot of Palhinha?
I'm not sure. I think Pereira might fit in to that system. I'm not sure. He has been an attacking midfielder. During his, he's been employed in many positions at Manchester United, but he has been that attacking midfielder. I wonder if he'll make the push further forward, but Fulham seem to be quite set with those two sitting in front of the back four. I think Solomon as a winger could be quite creative, but I don't see him drifting inside too much. So I think it'll be interesting. I mean, there's no real like-for-like swap, but I think there might be ways where you can get people to fill maybe part of that role each, and then it does get filled rather than having a player who just comes in and does exactly the same thing.
I do want to talk about the 11 of the team. Is Marco Silva the type of manager that will have almost a set and forget team that you can rely on each week? Or is there going to be quite a bit of rotation that people should be aware of?
Well, it's a very long season. And I don't know how many Fulham players will be going to the World Cup. Obviously, those squads haven't been announced yet. But for some of those players, they might need to be rested just so they're not absolutely exhausted when we get to March. So I think he will stick with a strong core. but we might see a few rotations sort of in certain positions where there is a bit more depth.
Let's move it to set pieces. I mean, why are the team so good at these?
I think they drill them a lot. I think obviously having someone who's, as strong and good in the air as Mitrovic really helps have that focal point for the set pieces. But I think, as you said, it's something that, doesn't really change throughout the league. So potentially, and I don't know, but it might be something that they've really targeted last year to set them up well for the Premier League. Because I know last time there weren't any goals from defenders, which would suggest there weren't many goals from defenders, which would suggest they weren't really capitalising on set pieces. And as everyone knows, Fulham really struggled to score goals that year.
I think as well, something that you said at the start, Fulham as a club have learned about the Premier League and how to survive, but also is maybe testament to Marco Silva himself that he has learned, because when he was at Everton, he had a pretty appalling record for set pieces. So this, in the Championship, Fulham had the lowest XG conceded from set pieces and the lowest goals conceded, and they had the fourth best XG from set pieces and the fourth best goals. I mean, is this something that you look forward to seeing, well-drilled set pieces, because it's a marginal gain that maybe other teams in the Premier League won't be prepared for?
I think it is something I'm looking forward to seeing. I know a lot of Fulham fans, and all of them say, we're terrible from set pieces. Like, in terms of defending, every time a team gets a set piece, they're like, oh, it's going to be a goal. And I hope that mentality is shifting after, what you said in those impressive statistics last year.
And I guess on the set pieces, who to target? We talked about Harry Wilson is taking them. Who's going to be the player trying to nod it into the back of the net?
I think it's going to be Mitrovic.
Okay, so let's move it on again to the transfer window. Would you describe it so far as disappointing? Because Palhinha, fantastic signing, a real coup for the team. Pereira, fairly good, but is this enough?
I think it's been quite a frustrating season. Mana Solomon's going to join in August. There's that whole thing where he can't join until because he's coming from a Ukrainian club. So I think he will be good. I think Lino is going to be a frustrating point for Fulham, especially having agreed sort of personal terms with the player, but can't come to agreement with Arsenal. And apparently Diop is just too expensive. And I know they would have liked to hold on to Nico Williams, but couldn't justify that price tag, and he's ended up going to Forest. So I think it's been frustrating, but I think there have been good signs. It would just be nice to get a couple more over the line before the start of the season.
Are you confident that the right players will be brought in there?
Well, the transfer window goes on into the start of the season, so there is that time to, negotiate. I think they do need. I think I'm confident they will get players. I don't know if necessarily they will be the top picks, but they might be. They might do their job, which is sort of all you can ask for.
So there's a lot of positivity around the club and analysing how they did last season, but we do have to talk about the end of the season, the last 11 games of the season, in contrast to the quality of the first part of it. Half of the team's 10 losses were in those 11 games. I mean, how do you kind of marry that up? Is that a worry coming into the Premier League with the fact of 5 losses in 11 games? Or do you think that the team kind of went into the classic on the beach mode already, looking to the season ahead, kind of dialing it down a little bit, almost to protect themselves?
I think it's probably part of both. I think there are some concerns, although the games that I wrote down that actually concerned me the most were the 3-1 home defeat to Coventry and a disappointing 1-0 loss to Sheffield United in December, which obviously can't be contributed to, we're basically up, we'll just sort of cruise. But there definitely was that, in the final games of last year. And I think it's impossible to ask players to keep up the same intensity when they've won the league and have already secured promotion as you can when you're really fighting for it at the start of a new season.
I mean, what was it about those two particular games that really worried you then? What was the negativity that you identified?
I just didn't really feel like they had that creativity going forward, and it's almost looked a bit sluggish, which I mean, I guess you expect because we talk all the time about how tough the Premier League season is, but the Championship one is really brutal on the players, especially towards the end of the season. And when you play as dynamic as Fulham is, you're not really conserving much energy. Even though you might be getting these, big goal scoring margins. But I just think those were the ones where it almost looked a bit flat. And I think that's something they're definitely going to have to avoid in the Premier League, because, you can't really dip your performance, especially when playing the clubs in and around you, because that, we've seen such tight margins for clubs going down, and those games really can prove the difference.
I do want to talk about comments that Marco Silva has made, and it links to this point as well. Is there a pragmatism to his game, maybe to identify we're not playing well or we're going through a bad spell, we need to change things up? Because he said, I will not change as a person, I will not change as a manager, our philosophy will not change. Is this Norwich-like kind of almost naivety that it's going to stay to the same attacking principles, or does he have that flexibility to kind of change things up when it is needed?
I don't think Fulham want to change in the sense that they'll become, one of those teams that just puts 11 men behind the ball and hopes, because that isn't the right philosophy. I don't think changing to that would suit, obviously he's brought players in to fit his system. And to fit the style of play he wants. So I don't think you need to compromise on your philosophy, but I think you can be quite pragmatic about it, especially when playing the top clubs and going, look, this is obviously how we want to play, but we can't compete with them on that level. So this is how we're going to adapt that for this game. And I think that's, managers do adapt for the opposition. You can't just say we're going to play exactly the same regardless of who we're playing against.
I mean, do you think, again, referencing games from last season, that the differing approaches in the Swansea game versus the Bournemouth game where the former game saw a more direct approach in the football, that kind of showcased that there is that ability to play a slightly different style to exploit the weaknesses, because it worked very effectively against Swansea, kind of getting more balls quickly to Mitrovic?
Yeah, I think definitely that's going to be what they're going to look at, as you said, slight changes rather than wholesale changes, because I think it can also be confusing for players if you've got, 1 week we want you to play like this and 1 week we want you to play like this, and a lot of teams really strive when there is consistency.
I mean, that sounds a bit like Emery ball at Arsenal back in the day. 1 week, one style, 1 week, another.
Yeah, and look how well that went.
I guess in terms of I guess a final question for you in this bit is fairly difficult first 5 games of the season, starting with Liverpool, but it is at home, then Wolves, Brentford, Arsenal and Brighton. Is it worrying that, quite often when teams come up, if they struggle to get points on the board in those initial games, psychologically, sometimes it's more damaging than even the football on the pitch? Does that worry you that there might not be many points picked up, or are you more positive that against some of those teams, Fulham can do the business?
I think if you're looking over the course of the season, you think Fulham have to target the Brighton and the Brentford games. I don't really think there's too much scope to say, it's early on in the season, potentially Brighton, because they do have quite a lot of Premier League experience. But I think those are the clubs that you really have to pick up points against. Because, Liverpool, obviously, there's always going to be the optimistic fans, but Liverpool is essentially a write-off and no one expects that. And the clubs around Fulham won't be getting points against Liverpool either. So I think it's really the other two that you sort of have to go, if we don't get points against these teams, when are we going to get them?
So last 2 final quick evaluative questions. What are your predictions for the season ahead for Fulham? What's the points tally? Where are they going to end up?
I'm not sure about a points tally, because I think that's so hard to predict season on season. And, sometimes you get one club who really struggles and everyone sort of picks up points against them, so it can be quite hard to measure. And, you know, last year it looked like Newcastle were going down until about December, and then they sort of skyrocketed. So I'm not sure about a points tally, but I think Fulham will be bottom 5, along with, you know, the obvious other clubs. And I hope they can cling to Premier League safety.
Are you confident in that, though? Are they going to stay out?
Well, I don't think any Fulham fan is confident. If you look at the last few years, it's been some pretty disappointing Premier League seasons that they've had to go through after, you know, that 10-year spell as pretty solid Premier League team. So I think I'm not confident, but I do think there is enough to suggest that they have what it takes to stay up, especially given that some other clubs, you know, with transfers and things, may struggle a little bit more this year than potentially they have previously. And, you know, Brentford without Christian Eriksen is a bit of a different proposition as well.
And, you know, it has been a pleasure to chat to you today, Sonia. So where can people find out your articles, your analysis? Because I'm sure people will be keen to keep up with your work so that they can stay ahead of the game and analyse Fulham themselves.
Well, working for the Press Association, we send stuff to sort of all the major media news outlets. I tend to tweet out my articles, especially the Fulham-related ones. So that's probably the best place to keep up with what I write. But because we're an agency, our stuff gets sent to everyone.
Oh, well, there you go. I'll put a link to your Twitter in the description below so that people can find you out, and obviously we'll tag you in that as well. But thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me.